Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled Parents stories. Imagine your parents showing up at your apartment with your entitled sister measuring out your furniture and planning to kick you out so she can move in rent-free. Sounds insane? Well, that's exactly what my narcissistic parents tried to do. Let's dive right into the relationship stories. And the first one is titled, "My narcissistic parents told my golden child sister that she could take my apartment." So it is a tale as old as time, one sibling getting all the attention while the other is left to pick at whatever scraps of attention were left. This was the case in my family, which consists of myself, my sister, mother and father. Before my sister was born, everything was fine. I got all the attention and love from my parents. They adored me, but after she was born, their attention was divided into what I can only describe as a typical family dynamic. Neither of us received more or less love than the other. When I was 8 and my sister was 3, this changed. Out of nowhere, she was hit with some serious illnesses. It was a very scary time, especially for my parents. We were so close to losing her, but after 3 more years of battling the illness, she thankfully won her fight and was finally free from it. After that, after my parents nearly lost their daughter, things were never the same. From the moment she got home from the hospital, my parents started rearranging the house, stating that I needed to clear out my room so she could have the bigger one. For weeks, I was barely spoken to. It's like they forgot I existed at times. They would even get jump scared when I walked into the room. I understood their behavior at first, given how scared they must have been and how relieved they now were that she was home safe. However, after a few months, I began to get sick of the constant preferential treatment, and as any 11-year-old would do, I ran away. It was immature, I know, but I was young and dumb and figured this was the best way to get attention. Hours into my running away, I ended up under a bridge near my school. I obviously didn't have the best plan and had left with one sandwich and a small bottle of water. I stayed there overnight, barely sleeping, while I cried to myself. By morning, one of the staff members from my school found me when I was then brought inside to be warmed up. The police were called to question what had happened. The police arrived at the same time as my parents, who looked understandably angry. After a lot of back and forth arguments between myself, my parents and the police, one thing became very clear. "Why didn't you file a report for your son?" one of the officers asked, and my parents went red. They did not have to say anything. Everyone knew what they would have said. They didn't notice it. I was grounded for months after this incident, and it gave them another reason to prefer my sister, as I was now dubbed the troublemaker of the family. As the years went on, Rose, my sister, caught on to the fact that my parents preferred her and used it to her advantage. "Thomas did it!" she would scream whenever she broke something. It didn't even matter if I was in the same room. I knew I would be blamed. "Thomas!" one of my parents would yell. I got used to hearing my name being called like this. I didn't do well in school. I was bullied and I had nobody to speak about it back home. My teachers were concerned, but I knew they couldn't have helped me. They did try to tutor me, but I was so distracted I could hardly pay attention. Looking back, I clearly had some slight learning difficulties that could have been corrected, but nobody was really paying close enough attention. "Thomas, drive your sister to her friend's party," my mother stated when I was 18. "I'm sorry I can't, it's my prom tonight." If you're wondering, at this stage in my life I already wanted to move out, but simply couldn't afford it. What I could afford, however, was an old beat-up car that I valued with my life. "I don't care about your prom, this is a big night for your sister," my mother scolded. "It's just a party, she can go to them all the time. Besides, I was never allowed to go to parties." My mother rolled her eyes. "It's just a small party with her friends, not a fraternity. What kind of parents do you think we are?" I held my tongue. There were so many words I wanted to use to describe the type of parents they were. I ended up having to take my sister to this party and then pick her up later on. I wanted to go to my prom, which I'd been planning on attending for months, but my parents said I needed to wait around the phone in case she calls and needed help or a ride home. I was fuming about it, and my girlfriend at the time even more so. Over the next 3 years, I still lived at home, trying my best to find a decent job and save for a place to live. And given my lack of education, it was hard to find something that paid well. However, after a while, I managed to secure a low-paid internship and worked my way up from there, doing general office administration stuff. The moment I had enough saved, I started renting a flat. I didn't tell my family what I was doing until the deal was completely done and I had a move-in date. I picked up all my belongings and left, not telling them the address. After I had unpacked and sorted everything out, I went back home to tell them the news. "I have moved out," I stated. All 6 eyes looked over at me in boredom. "What?" my father asked with a sigh. "I've been saving and I'm now renting a flat. I've already moved all my belongings in. This will be my final dinner with you." I was so anxious for this conversation, not wondering how they would take it. Okay, my sister shrugged. Thomas, where have you moved? My mother asked, visibly shaken. Doesn't matter. You have spent my entire 21 years acting as if I don't exist, so I'll be getting out of your hair. Thank you for everything you've done for me. I'm always a call away. I got up from the table and walked towards the door. My mom followed me, but before she could say anything, I opened the door and stepped out. Thomas, she called. I turned around to her, stepping closer. She stopped, opened her mouth to say something before closing it again. For a brief moment, I felt my heart shatter. I thought there might have been the smallest apology ready to come out. A small, I love you, be safe. But there was nothing. She had a pain in her eyes that I'd never seen before, as if she suddenly realized all the time she had wasted with me, and now it was too late. Alas, she was still at a loss for words, and so I got back into my dingy car and drove away. I cried the whole way to my new apartment, wondering if I'd made the right choice and upset that my parents didn't care more than they did. I ended up loving my apartment despite its many quirks. I loved it for the freedom it gave me from my family, who rarely contacted me. I went back home for the odd birthday of a relative and Christmas, but that was about it. When I was home, they made me do all sorts of chores that didn't exactly help to make me feel welcome. But then they insist I would stay longer, which I never did. After a few years of my new life, I got a couple promotions, moved jobs, and ended up being able to get a mortgage on an even nicer flat closer to the city. I could finally feel my life improving. Alas, just when things were getting better, my family came crashing to mess everything up for me again. At this stage, my sister already had 2 children with her husband, and I have no idea why my parents thought it was a good idea. She still lived with our parents while her husband also lived at home. Neither of them worked and both had flunked out of school. Unlike me, they were not going above and beyond to try and find other means of gaining qualifications. They were just lazing around waiting for the world to bring them an opportunity. From what I could tell, whenever I visited my family, my parents were beginning to get frustrated with my sister's lack of worry for her future. I knew they realized they had messed up by babying her for all these years. They still doted on her and let her do whatever she wanted, but it was obvious there was an underlying fear to add into the mix. She didn't seem to do much of the caring for her kids, instead leaving it up to our parents. They seem to basically be raising 2 more children. I do feel bad for them. They might be too young to realize yet, but this is not gonna be the best family for them. One afternoon I heard a knock on my door, the knock which started off this whole fiasco. I opened the door to see my parents, Rose, her husband, and 2 children stood in the doorway. Before I could even speak, they all began stepping inside. Now don't forget, at this point I still didn't think they knew where I lived, which meant they must have followed me home. Yes, this will be perfect, my sister squealed, hugging my parents. Thank you, thank you. Of course, honey, we just know that you would love this, my father replied. While the kids began crawling all over the place, the other 4 started walking around, measuring things up with their hands. I could hear as they began planning what pieces of furniture would go where, saying things like, "Ah no, we have to get rid of this sofa," and all but dissing my entire decorations. Excuse me, can someone tell me what's going on? I asked after they walked around a little longer. Oh, sorry, sweetheart, my mother stated. We just think it will be best if your sister lives here now. I didn't reply, out of shock, so she continued. You know, she has a whole family of her own now, and you don't have anybody, so you will never need all of this space. You cannot be serious. This is my apartment that I paid good money for. You cannot just come in here and act like you own the place. Give me a better explanation now, I demanded. Thomas, you know what she means. You're just a loner and always will be. You don't need this massive space. Me and my family do, though. My sister groaned, plopping herself down on my couch. And how will you pay? I asked, knowing full well none of them had a job. Well, we assume you will keep paying the mortgage and we can chip in with bills when we can, Rose's husband chimed in. I nearly saw red here. I couldn't believe their cheek. You could always just go back and live under that bridge and I then live in the apartment instead. Hehe. My sister laughed, referencing the worst moment of my childhood like it was just a joke. My parents did not even flinch at her cruelty. They just stood there waiting for my answer. And that is what made me snap. Years of neglect, favoritism and abuse came pouring out. I told them exactly what kind of parents they had been, how they had failed to even report me missing, how they had stolen my childhood to give Rose everything, and how they had turned me into their servant while treating her like royalty. I told Rose that she was a spoiled, entitled leech who had never accomplished anything without mommy and daddy's help. Everyone was scared, staring at me like I'd officially lost the plot or something. Get Out was my final demand, which they wisely followed quickly. As they were leaving, they tried to reason with me, wondering if I would live back with my parents. I slammed the door in their faces and bolted the door aggressively. I took hours to calm down and weeks to fully destroy the anxious feelings about the situation. I ended up going completely no contact with all of them. They tried to reach out and a few showed up at my door before I turned them away angrily. Update to the story: as of today, I'm still not in contact with any of them. It saddens me to lose my family, but after this event, I don't think I can ever consider myself to be part of their lives again. However, I would be lying if I said going no contact didn't turn out to be the best decision I ever made. The first few months were admittedly rough. I questioned myself constantly, wondering if I'd overreacted or been too harsh. But as time went on, I began to realize just how much emotional weight I'd been carrying all those years. Without their constant demands and criticism, I could finally breathe. My career took off in ways I never imagined. Without the drama and stress of dealing with my family, I could focus entirely on my work. I received a major promotion within a year of cutting contact, which came with a substantial pay rise. I was finally able to fully enjoy the life I had built for myself. I also met someone, an amazing partner who couldn't believe the stories I told about my childhood. They helped me see that what I'd experienced was not normal and that I deserved so much better. We've now been together for 3 years and recently got engaged. For the first time in my life, I'm part of a relationship where I am actually valued and respected. As for my family, I heard through mutual acquaintances what happened after I cut them off. Apparently, my parents had been planning to downsize and were counting on me taking Rose and her family in, or at least helping them financially. When I refused and went no contact, they were stuck supporting Rose, her husband, and 2 kids indefinitely. The financial strain became unbearable, and eventually my parents gave them an ultimatum: get jobs or get out. Rose's husband left her shortly after, not wanting to actually work for a living. She ended up having to move into a tiny flat with her 2 children and finally got a job, her first ever at age 25. From what I heard, reality hit her hard when she realized the world doesn't revolve around her. My parents tried reaching out to me multiple times over the years, usually around holidays or when they needed something, but I never responded. The last message I received was from my mom saying she was sorry and that they didn't realize how much they had taken me for granted. It was years too late. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if they treated me fairly, if they had noticed me struggling as a child, if they had valued both their children equally. But then I look at the life I've built, my career, my partner, my genuine friends who feel more like family than my blood relatives ever did, and I realize I don't need their validation anymore. Going no contact didn't just free me from their toxicity, it gave me the space to become the person I was always meant to be. And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story, which is titled "The Time Read Your Contract Backfired Regarding Holiday Pay." So back in 2015, I worked for a pretty dismal call center. It was an outsourced center that handled customer support for a lot of UK retailers. Staff turnover was really high, with the vast majority being on temporary contracts and the promise of a permanent contract being hung over people's head to make them suck up being treated like crap. After working there for about 2 years, in late February of that year, I was offered a permanent contract because they wanted to put me on their team leader program. The pay was slightly better, the job security was better, the only major difference was how holidays were handled. People on temporary contracts were paid for any unused holidays at the end of the working year in April. People on permanent contracts had to use their holidays or they would lose them. I had just over 3 weeks holidays saved up, so the day I accepted I booked 3 weeks off in March so as I wouldn't lose them in April. March rolled around and my manager told me that my holidays had been refused. I said that is fine as long as they pay me for them, and he replied that no, if you don't use your holidays you lose them. I said that I was trying to use my holidays and they were not letting me. He shrugged and said, "It's the duty of the employee to manage their holiday time wisely and I should read my contract," despite the fact that I'd only gotten that contract 3 weeks earlier and the holidays worked differently. Understandably annoyed that evening, I went home and read my contract from beginning to end and discovered my manager had overlooked one crucial part of the paperwork. The contract clearly stated that I had to give a week's notice and that any holidays not used would be paid to any leaving employee in full on their last paycheck. The next day I came into work and announced I would be quitting unless paid my holidays or allowed to take the time off, and if they accepted my notice, then to be sure my holiday days was included in my final paycheck. My boss asked me if I was really gonna quit over this, and I replied, was he really gonna lose one of his most reliable employees over this? He wouldn't budge. I assume he thought I was bluffing. So I handed in my notice, and on my leaving interview with my manager's manager made sure to explain why exactly I was leaving. And yes, my final paycheck did include my unused holiday days. The end. And the next one is titled, HOA claims to own structure on my property but has no easement proving access. And so I purchased a house earlier this year. Apparently when the HOA was first built around 25 years ago, they built a structure that was intended to be used by the community and that would require an easement on what has become my property for access. However, my plot and my neighbor's plot were some of the last to sell, and no easement was actually recorded on the deeds to these properties when that happened. Perhaps it was an administrative mistake, it's not clear. The previous owners of my home, as well as the previous owners of the neighboring home, put up no trespassing signs and had essentially been using the structure as private use shared between the two of them. When I bought the house, I was given a copy of an agreement signed between the previous owner and the neighbor, essentially giving each other easement access to the structure. It's right on the property line, and agreeing to split the cost of maintenance. That agreement did not mention the HOA's involvement in any way, and I assumed that the two owners had built the structure themselves, though now looking closely, it does not technically say that. I was recently contacted by the HOA explaining that they owned the structure and that they were hoping to resolve all this by having me and/or our neighbors grant them an easement. I in no way want that to happen. I have reached out to my title company, but I don't even really know what to say because I'm not sure the HOA is actually making a legal claim at this point. So my questions are there any situations where I would be forced to grant them the easement that they want? Also, do they still have any right to the structure itself, like maybe the materials used? If they try to make a legal claim, would my title insurance get involved or would I need to hire a lawyer? I'm really hoping I can just tell them to go pound sand. Comment number 1, yeah, here's probably what happened. The developer put the gazebo in the early days of the development. It was a sales tool. Eventually the developer sold all the lots other than yours and your neighbors. Then the developer thought they would squeeze a little more money out of the development and sell your lot and your neighbors. The developer made some extra money because there was no easement. This was not an accident, it was intentional. The HOA probably has some original homeowners and they are still trying to get access to this amenity that they were promised when they were house shopping. Those promises are not binding. Developers frequently overpromise on amenities and then underdeliver. The depreciated value of the structure must be somewhere close to zero. Presumably, the prior owners of your house and the current and any prior owners of your neighbor's house have shouldered the burden of maintaining this gazebo/dock structure for the entirety of its existence. This too weighs in favor of you and your neighbor being the sole owners of that little amenity. If the HOA wrote a letter/email to you, I would advise getting an attorney or your title company to respond on your behalf. It would be better if the title company did it because it will be clear to the HOA that they are now playing in the major leagues. There may well be a statute of limitations in North Carolina that effectively ends this dispute before it even starts. The last thing you want is everyone in the neighborhood traipsing all over your property. Update: after reaching out to my title company, they confirmed that there was no recorded easement on the property and recommended that I consult with a real estate attorney. I found a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and HOA issues, and our initial consultation was eye-opening. Based on what you've shown me, she said, reviewing the documents, the HOA has a serious problem here. They built a structure on private property without securing proper easements and then let it go unaddressed for 25 years. That's not gonna look good for them in court. She explained that in our state, even if the HOA could prove that they originally built the structure, their failure to maintain access or assert their rights for such a long period, while allowing private use by the previous owners, could make any claim they had extremely weak. This concept is called abandonment when you give up your property rights by not exercising them for an extended period. The attorney sent a formal letter to the HOA board requesting all documentation related to the structure, including original building permits, board meeting minutes from when it was constructed, and any maintenance records. Their response was telling that they could only produce a few old photos and some vague mentions in meeting minutes from 20+ years ago. The HOA's lawyer then reached out, suggesting a compromise where they would pay me and my neighbor a small fee for the easement. I declined through my attorney, pointing out that the structure had been treated as private property for decades and I had no interest in changing that arrangement. The HOA board did not take this well. They started sending notices claiming I was in violation of community guidelines by restricting access to community property. They even tried to fine me, which my lawyer quickly shut down as they could not prove that they had any right to the structure in the first place. Things got more interesting when my neighbor and I did some digging through county records. We discovered that the HOA had never obtained a building permit for this structure. My lawyer said this strengthened our position considerably. Not only did they lack an easement, but they had apparently built the structure illegally. The HOA finally showed their hand at a board meeting I attended. The real issue was not about maintaining community access, it was about liability. They were worried that if someone got hurt using the structure, they might be held responsible since they technically built it even though they had no legal access to maintain it. My lawyer then proposed a solution. We would sign a document acknowledging that we owned the structure and assuming all liability for it in exchange for the HOA formally relinquishing any claim to both the structure and any future easement. This would give them the liability protection they wanted while preserving my property rights. The HOA's lawyer initially balked, but when we mentioned the lack of building permits and suggested we might need to involve county code enforcement to sort things out, they became much more cooperative. We ended up signing an agreement where number 1, the HOA formally transferred any interest in the structure to me and my neighbor, and number 2, they acknowledged that they had no easement rights and would never seek one, number 3, my neighbor and I accepted full ownership and liability for the structure, and number 4, our previous private use agreement about sharing maintenance costs remained in place, and next, the HOA paid our legal fees as part of the settlement. The whole process took about 6 months, but it was worth it to get everything properly documented. My title insurance company covered part of my legal fees since this could have been considered a title defect, though I had to pay some out of pocket. The best part came during the final negotiation meeting. The HOA board president tried one last time to guilt me about taking away a community amenity. I reminded him that their own negligence and never securing proper easements or permits had created this situation and that the community had not had access to this structure for over 2 decades before I bought my house. The time to worry about community access was 25 years ago when you were building it, I told him. You cannot expect me to give up my property rights just because your board failed to do things properly back then. Some of my neighbors initially gave me the cold shoulder about the situation, but that changed when they learned the full story. Several even thanked me for standing up to the board and saying that they had become too aggressive in recent years about trying to extend their authority beyond what the HOA agreements usually allowed. My neighbor and I have continued to maintain the structure well, and we have actually become good friends through this whole ordeal. We've made some improvements to it that the HOA never bothered with during all those years they claimed to own it. The HOA board has been noticeably more careful about following proper procedures since this incident. I heard they even hired a property management company to help them review all the documents and make sure that everything is properly recorded going forward. Looking back, I'm glad I did not just give in to their demands for an easement. It would have permanently devalued my property and set a bad precedent for the HOA overstepping their authority. Sometimes you gotta stand firm when you know you're in the right, even if it means dealing with some conflict along the way. And the next one is an amazing petty revenge story that is titled, "You like the laundry soap I buy? Great, how about some fun soap just for you?" So this happened a while ago, but I just found this subreddit, so here it goes. I used to live on the 3rd floor of an apartment that had its laundry in the basement, which means 4 flights of stairs for me, no elevator, and I got a newborn, so I'm washing quite a bit. So we have cubbies in the laundry room for our soap and stuff, and I've lived there a year and never had an issue leaving my soap down there. Apparently, some new people had moved in that were using my soap. When I realized it, I left a note asking that they stop. But nothing, they kept using. Okay, now I am pissed. I got 2 bottles of soap, a blue-colored one, a clear-colored one, marked the bottles clearly that they belonged to me, so they couldn't accidentally say they thought they were theirs, filled the blue soap with blue-red dye, filled the clear soap with unscented bleach, and waited. It didn't take long. The next morning, I hear screams coming from the laundry room. 4 floors up, I heard it. I waited a while, ventured downstairs. In the laundry room, I found a bunch of wet clothes in the garbage that were bleach-stained. 4 days later, I saw a young man get into a car with a blue-stained t-shirt. Touch my damn stuff, and that's what you get for it. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.